George, can you send me your email? Oh, no, I've got your email. I've got your feed tests here, so I'll send them to you. You're on mute, mate.
Are you talking to me, Janelle, or?
No, George.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.
Yep. We'll give him a couple of minutes, Matt. I'll send it now. How you going, Nick?
Anybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I can't hear you, Janelle.
Ah, can't you hear me?
Don't turn that up.
Hey.
Can you hear us, Nick?
I can. Yeah, there you go.
We'll just give him a couple of minutes to a few more to join, and then we'll get started.
Yeah.
Did you guys get much rain?
11 mils yesterday. Yeah.
We had a big storm overnight. Did you guys get that?
No, it was around us, but no, we didn't get it. Didn't get it, but we were lucky the other day. We got the urea out on those paddocks we looked at the other day, and
yeah,
with a helicopter, and we got 17 mils of rain about an hour after the helicopter left. So that was,
oh God.
Mm.
I'll kick that.
Yeah, very good.
Mm. What about you, George? How'd you go?
No, we only had 8 mil, I think. We could see the storm to the south going around us. But anyway, I think, is the ground still warm, you reckon? Still cold?
Varies. I was taking some samples today, and down Toomer, which is not that high, it's only about 300 meters high. Unbelievably, you'd think it'd be a lot higher. It was about 13 degrees. And then up at Rosewood, it was 8 degrees.
Yeah, righto.
So where you are, I reckon it'd be more like 13 degrees. So it's starting to really get warm.
Right. It just, I mean, last year was obviously, I don't think as cold, would you agree, a winter as this year?
No. Yeah.
Yeah. It seems to be totally behind, I suppose, to where this time last year.
Yeah. Yeah, but I've noticed the growth in the paddocks I've been monitoring it's noticeable. It's really starting to actually go now.
Yep.
G'day, everyone.
Hello.
How we going?
Yeah.
You look cold, baby.
Now, back to the baby. Is there a baby yet? I think there must be. We can't hear you guys. There's the baby. No, yeah, we can't hear. So what is the baby? Boy or girl?
Congratulations.
Thank you. Jeez.
That's exciting.
Can you hear us?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yes.
can
It's a boy or a girl, Annabelle?
Girl, Sophia.
Sophia. Oh, gorgeous. Well done.
Thank
Oh,
you.
nice.
She's not very happy.
Doesn't like
When did
Prograze.
you have her? How long ago? How long ago?
2nd of August.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yep.
So 4 weeks.
Ah.
Yeah.
We better mute.
Oh, well done. That's exciting for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I think, Matt, I'll introduce you and we'll kick off. Is that okay? All right. So, unfortunately, COVID strikes again. So we've had to go to the Zoom meeting. Thank you very much, Phoebe, for organising this. So I've asked Matt Lieschke, who works for Southeast LLS, to present tonight's session. Matt was sort of brought up in the Phil Graham School of Prograze, so he's quite well versed in Prograze. And I'm a bit rusty because I've been out of the game for a little while. And Matt's also going to talk a little bit about Farm Forecaster tonight. Is he? Might mention it. We'll see. If we've got time, he'll talk about Farm Forecaster, which is a really nice predictive tool that they've got in the Southeast. And we've actually just got money to do a similar sort of thing for the Murray area, which I need to talk to you guys at Holbrook about at some stage. But yeah, so if we get a chance, we'll talk about that tonight. If not, we'll talk about it another stage. Towards the end, we'll just discuss how we want to deal with the next sessions. But yeah, Matt, do you want to take over?
Yep. Thanks.
Myself.
Thanks, Janelle. Yeah, and good evening, everyone. So yeah, tonight we'll be focusing on production targeting, which is in segment 3 of your manual. So if you'd, I guess if you're looking after tonight for a bit more info, then yeah, chapter 3 is where you'll find a bit of extra material on production targeting. I'll just have a go at sharing my screen, and hopefully this will work. So has that come up in full screen mode there now, Janelle?
Yes, it's fine.
So you can see the title page called Production Targeting.
Yep.
Okay, great. All right. So when the words production targeting are mentioned, most people would tend to initially think about what market they're targeting. And this figure here on this slide is from a New South Wales DPI prime fact, and the reference is down the bottom there. And for those of you that run cattle, you may have come across this prime fact before. But what it shows is the general weight range and fat score guidelines for various selected markets. And so having a clear understanding of what the market is that you're aiming for, that's really important because that really does underpin, I guess, how you put the overall system in place. In terms of what genetics or what traits you're really focusing on, timing of joining, how you address feed gaps and so on. So it's really important to have that target market in mind However, I guess the other thing though is that the target market really is, when you think about it, it's the destination for the product that you're actually producing. And there, as you know, there are a lot of steps along the way in producing that product. So setting targets, it's not just about defining your target market, but it's also about setting shorter term targets to help you, I guess, achieve your end goal. And those targets might be, well, it can be a combination or should be a combination of both pasture and animal-based targets.
Matt, are you happy if we ask questions as we go along? Is that all right, or would you prefer at the end?
No, you can ask. Yeah, more than happy to take questions as we go along. And I was actually going to pose a question now, which might be a good little test run for this, for being able to ask, I guess, questions and interact a little bit. But the question I was going to ask is, what are some of the tools that we can use on farm to monitor performance? So I'd just be interested in your thoughts there. And I guess it's a pretty broad question, but I guess I'm really sort of focusing on what are some of the things that you're starting, the skills you're starting to develop through the Prograze course.
The one we think about at home here is DSCs.
Yep.
Across the farm.
Yep. So that's sort of looking at whole farm performance. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess if you think back to the previous slide, when you've got a target market in mind that you're really trying to hit, what are some of the tools or things that you might use along the way to monitor progress?
Use ABVs.
Yeah. So we can use, was it ASVs?
ISPVs or EBVs, Matt.
Yep. I was thinking a bit more on the ground sort of stuff. That's all.
Body weight at particular times.
Yep. Yep. So we've got live weight. We can use live weight, yep, at various key points along the way. And we'll be talking a bit more about that in a moment. Yep.
Yeah, well, probably just, we've started putting, we run a composite, like a fat lamb flock, and we just started putting EID tags in everything to monitor right through to the, we monitor through to the supply chain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Any other thoughts? I mean, some of the things here are things that you wouldn't have quite covered yet in the course. But when we get there, you'll be looking at also, and some of you may have done this with previous training, is around fat scoring or condition scoring stock. Yeah. Obviously, with those target markets, there are guidelines or fat score ranges that you need to fall within, particularly if you're selling over the hooks. So there's live weight or carcass weight specs. There's fat score specs, and fat score also, if we think about it, is not just important from a marketing point of view, but also really important from a reproduction point of view as well. And hopefully you're starting to get a good handle on pasture assessment in terms of both quantity and quality of pasture and how that drives livestock production. And so we can also on farm use pasture targets. They are also really important tools that we can use to monitor performance. And we'll look at those a bit more in a moment. So really, in summary, what I was trying to get at is the pasture and the animal assessment skills that you're starting to develop throughout this course. They'll become really key tools that you can then use to monitor on-farm performance and help you to achieve those goals. Whether it's goals around joining stock, goals around lambing or calving down, or even marketing. So the other thing I think it's important to sort of talk about now is, I guess in extensive agriculture, we're trying to do the same thing largely on an annual cycle, but under different conditions, because we all know that no year is exactly the same. So there's a high degree of variability that we have to deal with. And also in livestock production systems, we tend to be dealing with quite long timeframes, which means there is quite a bit of scope there for things to drift off course. And so I guess the key to addressing this is this concept around setting short-term targets and monitoring progress along the way, because what that does is it enables us to be on the front foot and quickly respond if things start to drift a bit off course. And what that does is also enables us to react and adjust things on the go if need be. This screenshot here is a figure out of segment 3 in your manuals, and it's basically a general outline of the thought process involved in setting these production targets. So if we just start with the top right-hand corner there, we can see here that the targets are not just relating to the SAR weight of the stock. So SAR weight of stock is obviously a clear target that we would set our focus on. But we've also got other targets here that are also important around fat score for joining, fat score for lambing or calving, and we also would have pasture benchmarks as well, which would include clover content. And the reason why clover content is I guess so important is we know that it has such a large bearing on livestock production. So the top right hand corner is an example of some of the targets that we might set in our production system. And then if we look at across the bottom here, we've got time, and we've got up the side livestock performance / pasture productivity. And there's this planned pathway to target, which is what we are setting out to really achieve and have this animal, progress along this pathway to the end game. But at any point in time, things, as can certainly start to drift off course for a whole range of reasons. And so if we have these little, little milestones or checkpoints along the way, we can actually then, if things do start to go better than expected or perhaps not as well as what we'd hoped, we can start to then react and put plans in place. So if things are doing better than what we originally expected, it's just got here, consider what some of the options might be. So it might be that you were originally planning to target a particular market. It might have been that you normally turn off, weaner cattle, but because the season's better than expected, you actually decide to hang on to those young stock and grow them out to maybe feeders or even heavier weights. The other option might be that you actually still stick with that original plan and just sell earlier than you expected because they've reached live weights earlier. But then you might be able to then conserve that excess pasture, or even perhaps purchase additional stock in to try and take advantage of that surplus feed. On the flip side, if conditions aren't quite going or those targets things aren't quite going to plan, then you might look at developing alternative strategies. So the examples here are alternative markets. So it might just mean that, originally you were planning on a certain market, but because of seasonal conditions or whatever it might be, you sell earlier into a different market. Or you might seek an alternative pasture source. If those pasture benchmarks that are required to achieve a certain level of growth aren't being met, maybe it's trying to find a better paddock. It could be adjustment. It could be through supplementary feeding. So looking at those options. So it's a bit, I guess it's a bit conceptual here, but hopefully the next slide starts to sort of, put this into how you might actually break it down into practice. So this example here is for a beef system, and this is slightly different to the example in your manuals. So this example is for basically the primary target there, as you can see, is basically turning off a feeder steer in that 420 to 480 kilo live weight range by 15 months of age, and this is based on a late winter calving herd. And so really what we're doing here is we're saying that, okay, well, if we're land or calving down in August, September, and we've just put a nominal birth weight in there at 35 kilos, what we've already, and the end goal down the bottom at 15 months is in the following November is 450 kilos. We're basically just breaking it down there and putting some sub live weight targets in, if you like, around like a weaning live weight target, and then also a target at 12 months of age. And the concept there is, I guess, is by having those little checkpoints along the way, is that gives you something to aim for, and it also helps you to get a sense of whether things are actually on track or not. And if they aren't, what are you actually, then you can actually make a call on how you might deal with that. So in this example, the first step, if our aim is to achieve a weaning, an average weaning live weight of 260 kilos, our first target really then comes down to calving in August, September, and I've put down here a target of 1,500 kilos of dry matter per hectare at greater than 70% digestibility. Now that pasture target isn't a target that I'm trying to maintain from basically birth through to weaning, but it's certainly a target that I'm going to try and aim for at the time of calving. And the reason being there is that we know that pasture quantity and particularly quality in those early stages of lactation are really, really important in setting up the lactation and driving milk production, and therefore calf growth rates. So that's my first pasture target there. The other thing I suppose to note is that, if we are setting that target for calving, then we'd obviously really want to be, checking in to see how those pasture targets are actually tracking well in advance before calving, or so if your target's 1,500 kilos by mid-August, then you'd really want to be looking around at those calving paddocks a couple of months in advance to see whether those calving targets, those pasture targets, are actually going to be met for calving, and if not, what sort of intervention you might put into place. So that's sort of the first target there around calving, and then we've come around to weaning. We've weighed the stock to check to see how they're going, and from that point on, the next goal then is from weaning through till August. So over that sort of 5-month period, the goal then is to go from 260 kilos up to 350 average weight. And in order to be able to achieve that, we're now, during that sort of winter period, that late autumn winter period, in order to achieve an average growth rate of 0.6, which is required to go from 260 to 350, we really want those steers on at least 900 kilos of green at 73% digestibility or better. So that then becomes our target, our pasture target from weaning through till August. And if that's not available to continue on that 0.6, then I guess we've got a couple of options. We can either try and find a better paddock, we can supplement, or we just accept the fact that our 350 kilo live weight target for August won't be met. And we can sort of start to make calls around, whether that's going to be an issue or not. So from August then, we've got a yearling weight or a target of 350 kilos. And then the last sort of 3 months, if you like, in that spring period is to try and put on an extra 100 kilos and try and get them up to that 450 kilos for turn-off. And to be able to achieve that, we need an average growth rate of 1.1 kilos a day, which equates to a pasture target of 2,200 kilos of green at 72% digestibility. So that's just a theoretical example of how production targeting can work, or how you can sort of set it up. And it's really just taking, some, it's basically breaking up what is quite a long sort of time frame here up in, and just putting some key milestones or touch points in place. And, if you've got a set of scales, it's really good because you can come in and check to see how stock are travelling. But the other critical thing is, like, scales are great if you've got them, and they can really be, really provide some important data to be able to see how stock have performed, but they give us absolutely no information about how stock are going to perform into the future. So, scales are great, but it's really the pasture targets that are also really important, because they're actually the things that are going to help or basically drive the system going forward. So, it's important to have those pasture targets in there as well, and to really try and aim for those. And again, if you can't achieve them, then what alternative sort of strategies or things can you do? I'll just move on now to a prime lamb example for those of you that run sheep. And again, it's exactly the same concept, but this time for a prime lamb system. And the primary target here is to turn off 46 kilo live weight lambs at 8 months of age. And this is based around a late winter lambing system. So again, we've got our target live weights going from birth in August to a turn off the following April at 8 months of age at 46 kilos. And we've just broken it down into a couple of different sections in basically 3 month chunks, with our first target at weaning at 3 months of age. And it's the same sort of setup as the cattle. So we've got a target here for lambing, which is now 1,400 kilos, growing at 73% digestibility. And again, that, I suppose, with prime lambs, maximising weight gain between birth and weaning is just so important, because that really does sort of set the whole system up, and takes, if we can get some really good weaning weights achieved, that just takes a lot of pressure off the overall system. So that's where having high, enough quantity and quality in the pasture during lambing and that early lactation is just so important. So we've got a weaning target there of 30 kilos, and then to go from 30 kilos at 3 months up to so this is basically then a 6 monthly target of 40 kilos by getting towards the end of summer. This is really going to be the toughest period post weaning for this system, because obviously you're weaning lambs at a point in the year where pasture quality is declining at the end of spring, and to get good growth rates post weaning can be quite a challenge. So the pasture benchmark there is 1,300 kilograms of green at 65% digestibility. And I guess, in our part of the world, in the southern tablelands, we're going to really need some supplement in there in most years if we're going to carry lambs over summer. Down, I guess, where most of you are, around Wagga Holbrook there, that's where lucerne can really come into the mix and help push those post-weaning growth rates along. So again, this is just an example that you could really fine tune for your own production system. In this example, the final step is going from 40 kilos to 46 in the last couple of months, in the last 2 months, and the target there is, to be able to do that, we're targeting a growth rate of 100 grams a day, and that's our pasture benchmark there to be able to do that. So again, it's just an example of how you can structure this up and adapt it for your own production system. All right, so just to summarise then, so production targeting, the key thing is to really identify what your primary target is firstly, define it, be clear about it and write it down. And that might be, for example, turning off 450 kilogram steers at 15 to 16 months of age. Once you've really got that firmed up, setting those sub targets and strategies can really help just to break things down and to give you little checkpoints along the way. And they can be both livestock, so live weight targets, but also setting those pasture targets around pasture quantity and quality, and using those Prograze benchmark cards. That's really a key tool in your forward planning and getting a feel for what the expected growth rates might be. And then the third step in this is really, it's important to review the whole system. If that primary target isn't achieved, why not? Was it a genetics thing? Was it a seasonal thing? Was it because you had to really pour the supplements in and that cost, really did cost a lot and erode a lot of the profit? Take note of, if things aren't if you're not quite meeting those targets, what part's really letting you down, and make note of that so you can implement changes the following year. And those changes might be, simple little tweaks to the overall production system. It might just be, targeting slightly different genetics or putting a bit more emphasis on a certain trait. It could be you've identified a particular feed gap that really needs to be plugged. It could be just tweaking your lambing or your calving times. If you're consistently not achieving your primary target, maybe you do need to revise that. Maybe your environment, your pasture base, your rainfall, soil type, the whole box and dice, maybe it's just not quite geared up to really achieve what you're trying to turn off, and so therefore it might be worth just revising that primary target itself. Okay. The next two tables now it just goes through a couple of different targets. And again, these are just really examples, rough guidelines which you could use for different stages. So we've got some weaning targets there at 7 months of age. So growth rate targets to weaning and live weights. Vealers, for those of you that might be doing vealer production, some targets there. There's also some targets, and you'll go into this a bit more detail in the beef section of the manual, which will be down the track. But I guess your post weaning growth rates and what you're targeting there is really going to be dependent or quite different for your heifers or your heifers that you're going to join versus, if you're actually trying to grow stock out, your post weaning growth rates are going to be a bit different there. But there's just some examples, and there's also some targets there for replacement heifers. If you're joining them at 14 months of age, the targets there are really, around that 65% of mature weight. So, these targets are really going to depend on how big your cattle are. But if your mature cow weight's around 550 kilos, then your replacement heifers, weight at first joining is going to be in that sort of 330 to 360 range.
And Matt, that's a pretty vital one for your replacement heifers. If you can't get them to weight, your joining rate. Your joining is going to be right down. You need to get them to that weight without being over fat.
Yeah, that's right. It's a bit of a it's a bit of a balancing act. The heifer scenario. You sort of want them up to weight, but don't want to overcook them either. And so I suppose that's a good important point, Janelle, is that the previous examples there where we were sort of breaking things down and setting targets for trying to get stock to a certain weight by a certain age to turn off. We can actually use exactly the same concept and process for replacement females. So whether it be for sheep or cattle, we've got really our end target is that live weight at first joining, and we can actually then track it back and say, well, if this is our weaning weight and we need to get to this live weight by this date for first joining, and we can actually set some sort of benchmarks along the way and monitor to make sure that those replacement females actually get up to the required weight for their first joining as well.
And it also helps you make some decisions about, what paddocks you're going to put them in to get there. If you know the paddock's not good enough, you need to rethink your strategy or think about supplement, probably less so, but look for a better paddock usually.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a lot better to monitor along the way and I guess, steer things as you go along and be aware of how things are going, then, get into joining and going, oh, geez, I'm way under here and end up with a really disappointing, joining percentage. This table now is the same sort of thing, but now for sheep and lambs. This information is from the sheep CRC that looked at the literature for lamb growth rates, and it's pretty old data now to be over 10 years old, but I bet you it hasn't changed too much. And what's really evident when you look through this sort of table is that, for both our straight merinos and our first crossies, weight gain, while they're on mum, in that first row there is really quite strong for both. But once we wean, then I guess it does become a real challenge to keep the growth going. And we've done a great job over the years with breeding and genetics and selecting for high growth. But we need the feed or the fuel to fuel that growth as well. So there's just, this table has just got some I guess this is out of literature. So published data around different weight gains that you can expect for weaned lambs on green fodder crops, on lupin stubbles, on self feeders with dry pasture, and also in lot feeding. But I guess the key message, I suppose, in this table is, it really does, come down to after weaning, comes down to the quality of the diet, and you really need rocket fuel to get them to grow like rockets. The last couple of slides here, I just thought I'd touch on weighing livestock, because we have spoken a fair bit about, setting these benchmarks or milestones for certain live weights. But for those of you that have got scales and do a bit of stock weighing, which is great, just be aware of gut feel, especially when weighing cattle. We know that cattle off feed and water, they lose about 3% of their live weight in the first 3 hours. So for a 400 kilogram animal, that's about 12 kilos in the first 3 hours. So, that can actually throw your numbers out quite a bit. And it also depends on what sort of feed they've been on. So I think the key message there with whatever weighing you do, really try hard to be consistent in your approach. And that might mean, every time you weigh, you get stock in it might be around midday, you have lunch, and then you weigh at 2 p.m. and you try and get them through, in a fairly quick sort of fashion and get them back out on feed. That's just, I think that's a really important thing to be aware of. And this table now is for lambs or for sheep. So the first column there is for lambs and then for wethers, or this could be pretty close for mature ewes as well. And sheep are a little bit different. They tend to be pretty stable in the first 3 hours, but thereafter, they do start to empty out, and you lose a bit of gut feel there, and that can again throw your numbers out a bit as well. So important just to be aware of that one. And just to, I guess, highlight this, I've got an example here, and this is for steers. So we'll just go through this one. So Gene weighed steers at weaning, averaging 260 kilos live weight, and the steers were weighed around 4 hours off feed. The steers were weighed again 2 months later, and at the time the steers were grazing highly digestible pasture and weighed straight out of the paddock with no curfew. The steers averaged 320 kilos, giving an average gain of a kilo a head a day over that 2 month period. So straight away, hopefully you've picked up there that there's a little bit of an issue here, and that the initial weaning weight was recorded 4 hours off feed, and then the follow up post weaning weight was done straight out of the paddock. So the 1st of April weaning weight, again 4 hour curfew, average live weight of 260 kilos. Back in 2 months later, this time without a curfew, average live weight was 320, which equates, when you do the calculations, to an average gain of a kilo a head a day. But obviously there's a curfew, there's a 4 hour difference there that we should have taken into account. So if we had have actually taken that 4 hour curfew into account, using that rule of thumb from the table previously, their average daily weight gain was actually more like 0.8. So it's just an example of how the curfew can throw things out, and just to really try and be consistent in your approach. And I've just got a prime lamb one now to finish. So John got some lambs in on the 1st of Feb to see how they're going. Lambs were weighed immediately out of the paddock. They averaged 40 kilos live weight. Lambs were weighed again on the 28th of Feb, so 4 weeks later. This time the lambs were yarded at 7, and another job came up, so the lambs ended up being weighed after lunch. The lambs averaged 44.7 kilos, and John was a bit disappointed with this growth rate, given that the feed that they were on. So let's have a look at this one. So the first table here, lambs are weighed straight off feed on the 1st of Feb. So an average live weight there of 40 kilos. Now, if John had been consistent in his approach and went straight out of the paddock the second time round, the average gain would have been actually 240 odd grams a day, which is pretty respectable. But unfortunately, because that other job came up and they didn't get weighed for till after lunch, in the meantime they'd emptied out and lost a few kilos. So the growth rate came back at more like 170 grams a day. So it's, again, just showing you the impact of curfew there. All right, and just to finish off this talk, I suppose with production targeting, it's really about trying to look ahead into the future and setting those targets, both livestock and pasture targets. And there's a nice little example that in a grazing trial that I've been involved in, which really reminded me of how in agriculture the decisions or the actions that we take today can have quite long lasting impacts down the track. And so this fence line photo here is from the 28th of October last year. And this is up in the Crookwell area, and like most parts of New South Wales, we had a big spring last year, and the paddock on the left, although both paddocks grew a fair bit of feed, but particularly the paddock on the left, it was fertilised, and it grew an absolute mountain of feed last spring, to the point where the clover was halfway up your leg, and so therefore at the end of spring, that paddock on the left was crash grazed, and to really try and get in and just remove all that surplus material and leave it nice and open for the following autumn. Now, there was a bit of a breakdown in communication because that crash grazing was supposed to happen to both paddocks, but unfortunately the paddock on the right-hand side wasn't crash grazed. And so I then came back from holidays and got back up to the site, and to my surprise, the paddock on the left and the paddock on the right, which was supposed to look very similar at the start of the season, didn't. And so we can just see in the photo the effect of that crash graze. The one on the left coming into autumn this year was nice and open, ready for the opening rains, and the paddock on the right had an enormous amount of dry standing feed. That 7 hectare paddock, we tried to crash graze that in February with 500 wethers on 7 hectares to try and remove some of that dead material, and they just weren't interested in. I mean, that old dead material was such poor quality, and underneath it there was a fair bit of green pick. So you know what they were going to be targeting there, and unfortunately the crash graze wasn't that effective, and so. And so now this is July, so this is about a month ago, and you can still see on the right-hand side, those paddocks have been stocked all year, and the paddock on the right has still got a lot of this dead surplus material, which is still been a pain in the neck. And it's shading growth. It's having an impact on diet quality, and it just really was, quite a big reminder to me about this breakdown in communication or a decision, it could have been a decision in late spring last year, had these flow-on effects for quite some time to come, and so I think it's just fits in well with the production targeting that I guess. In our production systems, we do need to really look ahead well into the future in terms of how we're just trying to set things up. Thanks, Janelle. I'll leave it there. Maybe take some questions on the production targeting sort of stuff, and then if you like, I can quickly touch on farming forecaster.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. Hey, Matt, I'll grab the first question. Why have you thought about burning that?
Yeah, I did suggest that to the landholder, and that would be the ideal fix there, because it's actually quite loose on top. You could probably just get a set of cool burn, run a set of harrows off it into little piles and get rid of it. But yeah, it just unfortunately with everything else that's been going on that property, they haven't been able to get there and do it.
That example also, these guys have got a lot of flare-based pastures, and you can see where your feed tests where they've gone rank. The reduction in digestibility, protein, energy is across the board.
Yeah.
So it's sort of one of those things you've got to manage all the time.
Yeah. And I suppose in big years like this, I suppose we're heading towards another big spring. Those paddocks that you're able to keep a bit of pressure on and keep pasture quality up, not only with the stock benefit, this spring from managing pasture quality, but but those paddocks are then probably going to be the paddocks that are in the best position to really come away and be of highest value next autumn as well, because they have been kept in check, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, the digestibility will be better if you can control it so that you get some clover and back into the system.
Yeah. So yeah, it's just one of those things. In these really good years, you know, you sort of end up having to work quite hard and have to be quite strategic in your paddock selection to be able to try and make best use of what you've got. Yeah, it does become quite a challenge, that's for sure.
When you crash graze that paddock on the left, what sort of ground cover percentage did you have at the end of it?
Yeah, it would have, well, I didn't see it at the end of December, but yeah, that, like, I remember walking through that paddock when I took these photos here on, you know, in early Feb, and yeah, I mean, it probably got down to that sort of 70% mark at the end of summer. So yeah, I think we did a good job on it without going overboard, if that makes sense. And I think the other thing that really highlighted to me is it was crash graze at the end of spring. So if you think about at the end of spring, there was a lot of clover, a lot of, I guess, perennial grasses were starting to starting to go off, but overall, I guess feed quality across that paddock at the end of spring was fairly uniform in that it was all sort of that late spring, just going from green into dead. So pasture quality to a large degree was fairly consistent in that paddock, with a bit of variation obviously between species, but overall still quite reasonable quality, and the stock got into it and just cleaned it up. Whereas then as soon as we came into this year and we had a bit of rain, the crash grazing just didn't become an effective strategy anymore. I mean, it might have been a lot more effective with cattle, but certainly with those weathers in the paddock on the right-hand side, you know, we stacked them in there, and because all of a sudden now there was green mixed in with the old dead material, and dead material of very poor quality, they just weren't interested in the dead. They just were trying to target the green, and the owner said basically that, they were really starting to hammer the green, the new green growth, to a point where it was sort of, it was having a negative impact on the new green material trying to shoot out. So yeah, it was a much better job crash grazing late in spring when you've got more uniform, I guess, pasture quality across the board than trying to do it early in the year.
So if you think about that dead material in February, that material's had, how much rain did you have over the summer up there? Because you do get a bit of rain.
Yeah, it would have had a bit of moisture on it, for sure. Yeah.
That moisture is just leaching soluble carbohydrates out of that material all the time, and it's just turning it into a complete cardboard. So by February, it would have been, basically the equivalent of cardboard for them.
Yeah, I dare say like 40% digestibility, somewhere in that order, I'd say.
What's the species, Matt?
It's all Microlina, and the perennial grasses are basically Microlina and wallaby grass, and just with sub through it, which is I suppose naturalised now. It's been there for a long time.
Yep, and the green it was just that coming through the underneath.
Yeah, just those native perennials, and the sub trying to come through. Yeah.
You said that you fertilised the left-hand side, but did you fertilise the right-hand side? And what sort of fertiliser did you do? Like super?
Yeah. So this grazing, this is a grazing demonstration that I've been running since 2015. We've got 3 paddocks. The paddock on the left-hand side of that fence, there's the lime. It's a one-off lime hit at the start of back in 2015, and it gets single super every year at around that sort of 125 to 160 sort of rate. And then the paddock on the right-hand side of the fence there is a control, so it's no fert. And then there's another paddock you can't see, which is off to the right of the screen, also 7 hectares, and it's super only. So it didn't get the lime at the start.
Could you argue like your control paddock is all that microlina and that's seeded down, so you got a better seed bank there for years to come?
Yeah, I guess I mean, the microlina on the left-hand side is still seeded down. It's just that the stock then got put in after seeding, and basically, took a lot of the material out of it. So there still would have been seeding occurred and seeding that hit the ground. But I suppose microlina, like a lot of our perennials, they don't really. I mean, that's a very dense native pasture on both sides of the fence, and the microlina pasture and it's got wallaby grass through it as well, because they're perennials. They're not relying on that seed to come back the next year. So I don't think there was definitely no negative impact of that crash graze. I think basically the real positive is that it opened it up. Obviously over summer, with paddocks that you've done that to over summer, you'd need to keep an eye on them and probably keep stock off to maintain a bit of trash and some cover there. But certainly, when you come around to the following autumn, then those paddocks are well set up. They're nice and open, so that your clovers are going to have space and light to germinate and get those annual grasses going as well. And also, obviously, better light penetration to the base of those perennials as well. Whereas when you've got paddocks of a lot of overburden of material, you're just not getting light down to ground level, which is really what you're after.
Matt, what was the pH of those paddocks? And how much lime? What was the lime rate that was put on?
Yeah, we put out 2.5 tons to the hectare on the left-hand side there of that fence. And so the starting pH, going back a step, is about 4.2 calcium chloride, 4.1, 4.2, with aluminium levels starting off at about 16% in the top sort of surface layers and then getting down to about 60% aluminium by 20 centimetres. So she's a pretty acid, pretty acid environment. So I suppose those perennial grasses have been there forever and they're just very well adapted to those local conditions. What I have noticed though is that I think the application of the lime has certainly helped the legume component. That's one thing that I've noticed.
Matt, do you know the pH depth? Are you still acidic the deeper you go?
Yeah, we've gone down to 20 centimetres and we're monitoring that annually. The pH hasn't changed. Like, in those 6 years, the pH hasn't really changed, or aluminium hasn't really changed to depth, except for in the lime paddock where we put the 2.5 tons of lime on. It decreased aluminium to zero, but only in the surface sort of 2.5 centimetres. And then it was done. So that was quite an interesting observation, in that, we put 2.5 tons on, which is a fairly standard rate, but we only really corrected pH. Well, we lifted pH from 4.2 to I think 4.7 or 8, but only down to 2.5 centimetres. So it only really corrected the top inch of soil, and from that point down, it's unchanged. But interestingly, even though we only had an impact on the top inch in terms of soil chemistry, it just seems to have given the legumes a bit of a boost in that paddock, and that paddock has year in, year out had a much stronger clover component. And because of that, it's run a much higher stocking rate and returned more dollars to the hectare.
Yeah. So would that be what's the plan every 5 years to give it 2.5? You reckon, or?
Yeah, we were sort of going to. Well, we were originally thinking to sort of stretch it out to probably 10 years. That seems to be a bit of a standard sort of practice in the area, is that 2.5 tonne once every 10 years. But yeah, it's something that we might revisit and talk to the landowner about and see what we do next.
And that was incorporated, the lime?
No, that was just top dressed.
Oh, righto.
Yeah.
What about root growth of your clovers? Have you actually had a look at what their root growth's doing? Is it actually getting past that 2 centimetre fixed layer?
Yeah, I haven't dug too many plants up, Janelle. I mean, yeah, the roots are definitely going beyond.
Yeah.
But I suspect just the rhizobium's a little bit happier in that surface.
It's feeding the plant, even if it's doing it in the first 2 centimetres, which is where often most of the rhizobes can be anyway.
Yeah.
The nodules will be.
Yeah.
You'd have to wonder whether the treating lime is a better option rather than adding super. Like, what's the cost benefit of lime versus super? I always find that slightly interesting.
Yeah, I think based on the work at this site, we actually had a little nutrient subtractive trial just off to the side that we started originally, and just to see what was really going on. And I think the key message there was, I mean, this country looking at here, before we started playing around, hadn't received any form of fertiliser for about 13 years. And the baseline soil testing that we did showed that phosphorus, or coal well phosphorus levels at around about 8 to 10, which is very low. And sulphur was also very low as well. So we're starting from a very, very low soil fertility base. And for that reason, the biggest gains have come from putting phosphorus and sulphur back out into the system. We've just used single super here because it's generally the most cost-effective way to apply those 2 nutrients. But you could have done it through other fertilizers. So yeah, I think definitely the biggest gains here have been, by addressing phosphorus and sulphur first and foremost. That's given us, quite a big kick in production, and a kick in economics and stocking rate. And then the lime, I reckon, is just the cream on the cake, if that makes sense. If we had have just went out onto this country with such low fertility levels and just put lime on, the little bit of work that we did across to the side when we started throwing some lime out without fertiliser, you just weren't seeing any response at all. But certainly, from this work and this sort of country, I think, you do get a bit of an extra, it's nutrients first, and then lime becomes the cream on the cake and takes it to that next level again.
Matt, sorry, I think you might have mentioned it. So the amount of increase in the legume production that the lime made, was it double, do you think, or that you're seeing from not liming to the liming paddock?
Yeah, so I'm just trying to think back to the data, and I can send Janelle the links to this report. I sort of update this report annually. So I've got all the results sort of written up on this, if you're interested in reading a bit further. But to give you an idea, the average stocking rate for the first the first 6 years in the control has been in the order of 4.5 wethers to the hectare. The super has been sort of 6.5 wethers to the hectare, And then with the Lyman addition, with the super, it's gone up by up to about 7.5. So that's sort of the degree of step jumps. So it doesn't sound much, but when you start to overlay the economics on it, when you take into account both wool income and meat income, it is actually quite significant. So I think, you know, the gross margin results, when you take into account the cost of the fertiliser and all the extra animal husbandry costs, you know, we've basically doubled profitability going from the control to the Lyman super.
Yeah.
And I think the super on its own it hasn't quite doubled, but it's sort of, you know, getting up there as well.
So that's quality as well as quantity.
Yeah, and that's a really important point, because what's become really clear through this whole thing is that it's not just how much more pasture you grow, but it's the composition part has been huge. And it's just that, you know, you can see that the legume content in the control paddock is basically, it's just not really there. Like, it's there, but it doesn't do anything. As soon as you start putting phosphorus and sulfur out, we've seen a kick in the legume content, and then the lime sort of kicked it another step further. So
Is Matt frozen up?
I think in the sward of the pasture, and then once you go to the super paddock, it's up about 20% legume. And then when you go to the lime paddock, from memory, it's sitting up around about 40% legume.
No, that's great, Matt. Any other questions? And we might quickly move on because we're going to run out of time otherwise. Just before we do move on, I went out, unfortunately, I didn't take any photos because I didn't know we were going to Zoom, but I went out and did some pasture assessments out at Andrew Julian's and out at George's place at Clamber Downs. So just to give you a bit of an idea, pastures were running sort of about a tonne, 1.3 tonnes to the hectare of dry matter. Proteins were anywhere between 20%. George, your Phalaris paddock was down to 13% protein. That was because I cut some of that dry stuff as well. The paddock on the other side of the road, which didn't have a lot of dry material on it, it was 20% protein. Energies were up around 10 megajoules, 8 to 10 megajoules. So, you know, what you'd expect at this time of the year. Digestibilities were all around about the 70%. So pretty good quality. That was about 2 weeks ago that I took those pasture tests. So, if I'd known we were going to Zoom, I would have taken photos so you could see what we're looking at. All right, Matt, do you want to run us through a quick introduction to Farm Forecaster? I'm keen to do this because we're going to have some sites in the next little while for the Murray area. So
yeah, okay. How much time do you want me to spend here, Janelle?
What do you reckon? 15 minutes, maybe?
Yeah.
That'll about pull us up. We have a couple of questions afterwards.
Yeah, rightio.
Yeah.
No worries. So this is a project that we've sort of been involved with since 2016, and with a couple of farming systems groups in the local area, one being the Monero Farming Systems Group, which is based down around sort of Cooma, Bombala through there, and also the Tablelands Farming Systems Group, which is more based around Goulburn, Crookwell area. I'll just bring up the network. I'll hit this network button. So can you still see that screen there, Janelle?
I can just still see your presentation, your PowerPoint.
Oh, rightio, sorry. If I go to... okay.
How many screens you got going, mate?
I've got a few going, but I reckon this might work.
Yeah, that's good. We can see the probe network now.
Rightio. So I just sort of pull this map up because this gives you a bit of an idea of where these moisture sensors are. So there's sort of Canberra in the middle of the page. We've worked with Tablelands Farming Systems to put so basically all these green dots here, and they're all green because they're chock-a-block full of moisture. These are all moisture sensors that we've put in the ground since 2016 in different stages. And then if you move down going south, you can see there's another batch or group of sensors that sit on the Monero as well. So these, like I said, these sensors have been in the ground now for a number of years, and we received some funding from the Australian government through the National Landcare Program to basically build this website to be able to view not just the moisture sensor data, but also to be able to look at what that means in terms of future pasture growth. So if you're interested in having a look, the website is farmingforecaster.com.au, and this is what you'll see when you go to the homepage. You can actually access this via your web browser on a phone or a tablet. So yeah, it's quite good to view on mobile devices as well. But what we've got on this website for all of those different sites is, we've got a display here showing moisture content at different depths. So there's sensors at different depths going down through the soil profile, which is displayed here, and it's all sort of real time. So we've got measurements being picked up out of the paddock every hour and logged here on this website. So this is showing us our current moisture readings for Burrawa, which is I guess in that sort of area just to the I suppose you'd say the west of Yass. So moisture percentage readings, how that moisture percentage compares to this time last week, this time last month, and year on year. And then we've got all these sites have also got a rainfall, like an automatic rain gauge in the form of a rain bucket. So we get some rainfall data coming in when we have rain, and soil temperature readings as well. But the real big thing with this website, we did have an older website which we were showing this information, but when we developed Farming Forecaster, the big advancement was being able to incorporate this pasture forecast, which sits over here. So what this is now, this is actually modelled data. So for each of these probe locations, we have a grass grow model, which is actually being developed for that location. And the grass grow model data then shows us where our current pasture, kilograms of dry matter per hectare. So hopefully some of these numbers here are starting to make a bit more sense to you with your pasture assessments that you've been doing. But what it's showing is that this little black tracking line here is showing where the modelled herbage mass is. So currently sitting at about sort of 1,600 kilos. And then what it's also showing is that the blue line, the yellow line, and the red line at the start of each month, the model actually looks at what the conditions are like in terms of soil moisture and herbage mass. And then using historical weather data for that location, it actually then projects forward for the next 3 months to show us what the likely range is in pasture availability. And that's just the green component. So in a nutshell, what this is showing is that for this site, at this time of the year, we are sitting well above average in terms of pasture, in terms of herbage mass. And regardless of what happens, even if things turn pretty dire in spring, you can see that we're still tracking for a fair way through spring, well above the long-term average. So it's giving us a very it's showing us where we're sitting currently, in terms of historically speaking, but also painting a bit of a picture of what we can expect to see over the next sort of three months ahead. And if you click on this drop-down list here, this is showing you all the different sites that you can select from across the southeast. So this is just a tool that we've developed. It was launched about 12 months ago, a bit over now, and we've at the point now where it's starting to be expanded into other parts of the state. So over the next sort of 12 months, you'll sort of start to see other areas of New South Wales come online and with this sort of information as well.
So Riverina have got a few sites that they're going to put on, and like I said, I've got some money to do some sites in the Murray area. So it's a great tool because particularly if it's dry, it gives you sort of the probability of how things might pan out, So it's really useful during those sort of dry times. I mean, it's good now if things go bad, you're tracking on the red line. If it stops raining, you're still going to have some residual growth there to get you through for a period. So it's pretty useful, I think.
Yeah. And Holbrook Landcare's got 4 soil moisture probes in, and we're sort of trying to get our information on this farm forecast platform as well. It's it's very easy to read. And
that actual model is a program called Grassgrow that Cyril have had for years. Well, not for quite a while, but it was not that easy to use. But this is in a package now that's so much easier to use.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, before this website, we had all these moisture probes across the region, and so we had to sit down twice a year and manually run these Grassgrow models for every moisture probe location, and we used to produce this physical report and send it out to producers. But it was a pretty big job running all these models for all the different locations, and every time we stuck another probe in the ground, the job got bigger. So the big advancement with this is that it's just automated the whole process. So it's really cut the labour out of it. And the big benefit for producers is rather than getting a report twice a year, you've actually got updated pasture outlooks at the start of each month. And also a little black tracking worm, which updates every 3 days or every week, depending on how you set it up. But you're getting much more regular, up-to-date information about how the season's tracking and what the likely, where things are likely to head in the months ahead.
Do you guys reckon this might be useful for what you do?
George, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no brainer.
If you're looking for a place, Janelle, to put one.
I'm going to have to use existing probes, sorry, but there might be something with Riverina near you, George.
Yep.
And there's a bit more detail that sits behind it too. So, if you click on that View Network button, that brings up that map before, so you can get a bit of a picture of how soil moisture is sort of sitting across the region. And then if you go into this more probe details button here, there's a bit more info that sits behind that as well. But yeah, if you go into this more pasture detail, this actually has quite a bit more information around the Grassgrow model, and gives you. It just gives you. I mean, this graph here is what appears on the home screen, which we've already looked at. But then it also gives you some predictions around ground cover, female condition score. So where condition score sits relative to history for this time of the year. So we can see here, because of the big season, female condition scores way up around condition score sort of almost 4. which is probably pretty close to what a lot of people are experiencing at the moment, particularly in this part of the world. And then it's got some outputs here in terms of projected stock weights for young stock, for growing stock. And then in drier times, if it's projecting a bit of a feed deficit, it can actually then start to look at, whether supplementary feeding is likely for weaners, and also if it's likely for your mature stock, and also how much, what's the chances of supplementary feed being needed in that reporting period or that 3-month window, and also how much. So that can help with some forward planning in terms of whether you need to start looking into, buying some sup feed and what sort of quantities you might be needing.
So just to explain, every probe site, you got to characterise the farming system. So when we do it, we'll try and get something that's pretty average farming system for the area, so it's applicable to people. Is that fairly accurate, what I've...
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and so up the very top of each site, under these headings here, there'll be some information around what the assumptions are, or what's this virtual farming system actually based on. So for the Burrell one, you can see here that it's based around a self-replacing merino flock, lambing on the 28th of July. There's some information there about replacement strategies, and when weathers are turned off. There's an annual DSC rating, so stocking rate there for the farm system. Some information around the pasture base that we're modelling, the soil type, soil fertility, so that takes into account fertiliser use and soil fertility, elevation, and it's also showing you that for all these modelled farms, it's actually based on gridded data, which is it's a 5 by 5 kilometre grid. So the moisture probe is where that red pin is, but the actual grass grow, the weather, the historical weather that drives this grass grow farm system is that white box is the 5 by 5 kilometre grid that where the weather data is sourced from. So it's giving you it's not giving you a pasture forecast for that particular farm where the moisture probe is. It's more giving you a pasture forecast for that region or that locality, which is based on that 5 by 5 kilometre sort of grid.
So how much interest has this project sort of attracted to producers?
Yeah, a lot of interest, and now we're getting a lot of interest, both not just within New South Wales, but a lot of interest interstate as well. So we're currently talking to a group down in South Australia who are keen. Victoria have expressed interest, and Tasmania. It looks like Tasmania might come on board as well. So it's something that's certainly sparked a lot of interest. Fairly broadly.
Yeah.
It really does help you with, knowing what you've got giving you a bit of an idea of what you've got ahead of you, particularly, when you're trying to work out what you're doing with stock, what weights you need to get them to, and whether that's going to be possible given, whether you're running a 10% oil or a 50 or a 90, so useful for that.
And I think it actually ties in with the production targeting that we were talking about earlier on, Janelle, quite well, and that really, we're talking about monitoring things and trying to work out if things are drifting off course or not, for both better or for worse. And really the pasture forecast is giving you a sense of which direction things are likely to be heading. And if things are looking to be better than average, which certainly is the prediction or the outlook here, and we know that BOM are certainly very positive in their spring outlook for rainfall, that's giving you some confidence that we are heading in a very for a pretty solid spring, and therefore, there could be opportunities that presents.
Hang on to classes that you might have turfed earlier, sooner than later.
Yeah, that's right. So it's I guess people naturally sort of see this as a bit of a risk management tool for the bad times, but I also think it's also a tool that can be used to really flag opportunities as well. And I know that there's a producer that's got one of these sites down the Monero, and he's a trader, and he uses this to largely base his trades around now. That's what he goes by.
Yeah, no, that's great. Any other questions for Matt? So before we finish up, my plan was to have the next 2 sessions on farm, where we'd be looking at condition scoring and some like breeding stuff. So I'm not sure how we'll go about if we're still in COVID lockdown. We'll just have to play that one by ear. But I'm keen to get back on farm if I can. That said, I need somebody who has got a good set of sheep yards and is prepared to bring some sheep in, and obviously cattle yards for both groups. So if anybody wants to put their hand up with a good set of yards to go to next. If not,
me and Annabelle could possibly do it. If that was going to.
I can't. Sorry, is that you, Jack? I can't really hear you.
Sorry. Yeah, me and Annabelle could possibly do it. Yeah.
That'd be fantastic. George, you were supposed to go and look at sheep at your place. Well, we're going to go to look at your pastures. Do you want us to come? Are you prepared for us to come and look at the sheep at yours?
The yards aren't there yet.
Oh, okay. Yes, that's fair enough.
So, I mean, happy to use it. That's fine by me. Whatever works. We're landmarking next week, so I don't know if that's a stage you want to use that or whatever.
Yeah. Well, when we're down for the 28th and 29th of September, but we might have to push that out when we see what happens with lockdown.
Yeah.
All right. We'll wait and see with that one.
Yep.
Me and Annabelle, we also have some 500 dry ewes, and we've got pretty decent sheep yards, and we'll probably do the sheep course anyway, if you want to do it at our place as well.
All right. Well, that's something to think about. I'll have it. I've got a couple of presenters coming in for that one. So Shane from Holbrook Bet's going to come in and do the cattle with us, and Jim Mecca from Wagga's going to come and do the sheep with us. So I'll have a chat with them, and yeah, we'll work it out. I'll give you guys a ring.
Yep, no worries.
Sounds good.
All right, lovely. Thank you. Thank you for all turning up, and I'll send a copy of the recording out to you all, and those who didn't attend today, if that's all right with you, Matt.
Yep, that's fine, Janelle.
All right, lovely. Thanks. All right, we're finished with 2 minutes to spare. Phoebe, have you got anything you want to tell the guys?
No, I think that's all good. Yep. No, thank you very much, Matt and Janelle. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you, Phoebe. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, man.
Cheers.
All the best.
Okay.
Yes.
Night.
I'll be in contact about the next session.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers.
Yes. Right.